The year was 1937. New York City was still under the yoke of the Great Depression. The weather was nice though, and it was free. Families were out and about enjoying the holiday festivities. A feeling of optimism was felt throughout the air. The Gedeon family were feeling equally optimistic. Although Joseph and Mary were recently separated, the family had planned to celebrate the holiday together at Mary's house, which doubled as a boarding house and brought in some much-needed extra income. Ethel, Veronica's older sister, had arrived the previous Sunday morning with her husband. Her father, Joseph, was already there, waiting. He had no key to get in, and despite how loudly he knocked, no one would answer. This worried Ethel. She unlocked the door and the three quickly went inside to investigate. Strains of music played throughout the house, so they assumed someone must be home. They called out Mary and Veronica's names as they cautiously walked from room to room. When they reached Veronica's bedroom, they came upon a gruesome scene. There was Veronica sprawled across the bed, face down. She was stark naked, and there were bruises on her neck. The young model was stone cold dead. Beacon Hill was pierced by the shouts of a man racing towards the 17th Precinct police station. Alternating between English and Hungarian, he cried, "They've been murdered! They've been murdered!" The man was Joseph Gedeon, an immigrant upholsterer and father and estranged husband of the murdered women. After the police arrived at the dwelling, a search was undertaken. At this time, Veronica's mother, Mary, was nowhere to be found. Her family hoped that this meant she had escaped the brutal attack, and she was now lost or hiding somewhere, disorientated. Her body was finally discovered under Veronica's bed. Like her daughter, Mary had also been strangled. Although she appeared fully dressed, her undergarments had been removed. The police suspected a sexual assault had taken place, but the autopsy results would show that neither Mary nor Veronica were subjected to any sexual interference. In another room they found Franklin Burns, an Englishman who had worked as a bartender, and who had been renting from Mary since the last boarder, a sculptor, had left. He had been stabbed multiple times in both the head and neck. The murder weapon was long and sharp. Investigators would conjecture it was likely an ice pick. Veronica Gedeon had always dreamed of stardom. Veronica wanted her name to be known, but not like this. She was born in 1917 in Astoria, Queens, to Joseph and Mary Gedeon. The Gedeon family lived a modest life and worked hard to make ends meet. Veronica, known as Ronnie to family and friends, dreamed of something more. She was young, beautiful, and highly ambitious. Everything seemed possible. By the age of 20, Veronica managed to land several commercial modeling roles in Long Island City, and was quickly becoming a popular model amongst the art and photography scene. A majority of her gigs were for pin-up work. She often graced the covers of crime-orientated periodicals, including two of the most popular at that time, Inside Detective and Headquarters. Scantily dressed, the young model would be photographed in disturbing poses, usually recreating crime scenes. Investigators began the painstaking process of collecting evidence for clues, but found it difficult to maneuver around the growing crowd of reporters. It was common during this time period that photojournalists would appear on the scene, even if the investigation was ongoing. It was the perfect headline, a triple murder on Holy Easter morning. Once word got out, there was no chance of keeping the media away. The police tried their best to salvage any evidence they could. They quickly gathered that there had been no signs of forced entry, and all of the Gedeon's valuables were accounted for. Oddly, the only thing that appeared to be missing was a small alarm clock with a luminous dial that sat on Veronica's desk. There was nothing particularly remarkable about this mass-produced item, and investigators found it peculiar that any burglar would want it. It must have been someone the victims knew, they reasoned. As they searched through the victim's belongings, the police discovered a diary that Veronica had hidden in her drawer. After flicking through the pages, they would find their first clue. Several times Veronica alluded to a man that she was afraid of. She had not included the name of the person she was fearful of, only the letter B. There were several men in Veronica's life that this initial could refer to. After questioning people close to the family, the first person of interest on their list was a man named Stephen Butter. Stephen was a nice young man apparently, who worked as a messenger on Wall Street. He and Veronica were often seen together in a social context, but before investigators could even locate him for an interview, Stephen contacted them first. He called at the Gedeon house looking for Veronica, while evidence was still being actively collected. Police would not tell Butter where Veronica was, but instead asked him to come by the station for an interview. Assuming something terrible must have happened, Stephen went there right away. During the interview, police learned that Veronica and Stephen had been out that Saturday night. Butter claimed that he had returned around 3 a.m. on Sunday. The last time he saw Veronica was when he had safely walked her to her door. It was then that the officers let Butter know why he was there. Upon hearing of Veronica's murder, the young man became grief-stricken and broke into a fit of sobs. The police found his reaction to be completely genuine. Stephen Butter was ruled out as a suspect. The police now focused on the next B on their list. It was Veronica's ex-husband, a certain Bobby Fowler. The couple had married at the tender age of 16. The relationship did not last long. They were both young and immature, and mutually agreed that they clearly made a mistake. The marriage ended on good terms, and they still occasionally met up for a coffee. The last time Bobby saw Veronica was a week before her death. However, Flowers was to be ruled out too. He had worked late that night, selling hot dogs at an event. His alibi checked out with his boss, and he had dozens of customers to back him up. Although the jilted lover theory still seemed plausible, especially when Veronica's lively social life was taken into consideration, investigators were still suspicious of her father Joseph. Mr. Gedeon's reaction to the murders had been verging on cold disdain, hardly anything in comparison to the scene Stephen Butter had made. Joseph's guilt seemed very likely as investigators continued to talk to him. He spoke openly of his dislike for his wife Mary. Their relationship had been rocky and he was glad to be rid of her. Joseph was also clear in his disagreement over Veronica's career choices. He found it shameful that his daughter would choose to show herself off like that to men. He said that Veronica was a tease and that it was of no surprise to him that she had been murdered. Detectives would have arrested him if it wasn't for one thing. Joseph had an alibi for that night. He had spent the evening at a bar, getting drunk and playing skee-ball with a friend. However, when the police questioned his friend, they learned there had been a period of time when Joseph left the bar. It happened to be the exact time when the murders occurred. Joseph Gedeon was taken in again for questioning. This time he was subjected to brutal interrogation tactics. The police wanted a confession and were willing to do anything to get it. Despite the beatings he received, Joseph Gedeon would not change his statement. He did not kill anyone. He would later be released after his neighbor came forward to police, saying that he had seen a drunk Joseph return to his own apartment during that time, and he did not leave it during the crucial period. As investigators had a closer look at Veronica's diary, they found that on several occasions the model had wrote of B's infatuation with her older sister, Ethel. She found this to be rather obsessive and unsettling, and openly expressed her disapproval. In her diary she wrote, "He will never marry her if I have anything to do with it. I am going to take the matter up with Mother. She will help put the kibosh on it." Police questioned Ethel who Veronica was referring to. Ethel was mildly shocked by the question. "Well, it was silly Bob Irwin, of course," she told them. Irwin had once been a boarder of Mary's. He was considered to be a pleasant young man and a talented artist with clay and stone. Ethel claimed that Irwin got along with everyone in the family and couldn't have possibly hurt, let alone killed anyone. In regards to Veronica's writing, she explained that Irwin indeed had a crush on her at one point, but Ethel only saw him as a friend and was already engaged to another man at the time. Irwin would later move out of the Gedeon house, but he still stopped by for a chat on occasions. Police started to focus upon the mysterious sculptor. Upon further investigation, they discovered his disturbing past. His mother was a religious fanatic who devoted all of her time to raving incoherently about the scriptures. The philandering father abandoned the family when Bobby was 8, leaving the boy with a case of congenital syphilis, and Erwin's brothers both held a long criminal history. Bob Erwin was prone to explosive outbursts of rage, and had been fired multiple times from jobs after becoming violent with co-workers. He had also spent much of his life going in and out of psychiatric hospitals, sometimes spending years there. Investigators would also learn that Bob Erwin did not have a mere crush on Ethel. It was total obsession. Erwin later referred to Ethel and himself as soulmates, and would do anything to be with the woman he loved. Because of this, he also hated Ethel for distracting him. Erwin believed that his best works of art would be created through a method he referred to as visualization. With visualization, he believed he could create physical art by conjuring up a perfect image of it in his mind, and then building it into reality with pure mental power. This method, believe it or not, had not worked thus far. Why, you may ask? Well, Bob blamed women, in particular Ethel, for distracting him from realizing his artistic genius. Sometime earlier, Erwin's DIY cure for the aforementioned distraction was to perform a castration on himself by attempting to remove his genitals with a straight razor. The operation was unsuccessful, and afterwards he was committed to Rockland Mental Facility for 3 years. On the night of March the 20th, 1937, Bob Erwin made his way to the Gedeon residence with the intention of murdering Ethel. He had brought with him a sharpened ice pick to do the job. Erwin wanted to make the kill quick and clean, so as not to damage Ethel's perfect beauty. He was greeted at the door by Mary, who was happy to see him. She invited her former lodger inside. Right away, Bob started talking about Ethel. He asked when she was going to be home. Mary was confused. Bob knew Ethel didn't live there any longer. She reminded him, gently, and tried to move on to another subject. Bob would not let it go. He continued to ask for Ethel, up to the point when Mary had enough. She told him to leave, and when he would not, she threatened to get Franklin Burns, her current lodger, who was sleeping in a room nearby. This is when Bob Erwin snapped. "The room was blue with death," he later said. "There wasn't anything I could do." "The room was blue with death. There wasn't anything I could do." In a fit of rage, Erwin grabbed a hold of Mary's neck and strangled her to death. He then hid the body under the bed. Veronica was due home at any minute. Erwin began to prepare for the event. He would later claim that he had no intention of killing Veronica. His plan was to knock her unconscious with a bar of soap wrapped in cloth. Veronica returned at 3 a.m. She went to her room and undressed for bed. Erwin then attacked. He knocked Veronica several times over the head, trying to render her unconscious. When that didn't work, he became furious and began to strangle the young woman. Irwin was positioned behind her and believed she didn't know the identity of her attacker. Veronica managed to get out a few words. She called Bob Irwin by name and begged him to stop. Irwin was shocked that she knew who it was. It was then that he decided Veronica must be killed too. Both murders had created considerable noise, but not loud enough to wake Franklin Burns. The Englishman was deaf in one ear and had been sleeping on the wrong side that night. Irwin, who had been introduced to Burns earlier that evening, knew that he had to get rid of this potential witness. He stabbed Franklin Burns 11 times in the head and neck, using the pickaxe that was originally meant for Ethel. He said later he stood amongst the carnage and told himself, "Buddy, you really did it." Police were sure they had their man. They went to the last known residence where Bob was known to be staying, but when they arrived, they learned he had moved on 2 days earlier. The police called out a citywide manhunt, enlisting the help of the media. A daily news special edition featured 16 shots of Ronnie Gedeon, mostly nude or in lingerie. The raunchy publication prompted news boss Joseph Medal Patterson to ask himself, "Should we have done this?" Yes, he soberly concluded. Murder sells papers, because we are all fascinated by murder. The only trace of their prime suspect was his abandoned suitcase that he had left at Grand Central Station. Inside the suitcase was the small alarm clock that had been taken from Veronica Gedeon's room. It was the first piece of physical evidence to link him to the crime. But Bob Irwin could be anywhere. The staff of Inside Detective had been greatly shocked by the murder of one of their models. Their careers had been surrounded by horrific tales of crime, but no one had expected it could happen to one of their own. They knew Veronica Ronnie Gedeon as a sweet and kind-hearted girl, but the headlines that reported her death told the tale of another girl. To the media, Veronica was nothing more than a prostitute who lived a dangerous and troubling lifestyle. She wasn't the victim of a terrible crime. They seemed to insinuate she was to blame for it.
Don't forget to visit Oddie's Global Emporium. All your desires fulfilled.
The editor of Inside Detective was angry at what the press were writing about the sweet girl they knew well. They began an investigation of their own. In one edition of their publication, Veronica was once again placed on the cover. They wrote an article about her case and included a photograph of Bob Irwin. Inside Detective's public reach was far more than the NYPD. It may have been a long shot, but they were determined to get justice for Veronica. A female hotel worker in Cleveland, Ohio, was on her coffee break and was flipping through the magazine. She noticed that the photograph of the wanted suspect Bob Irwin looked an awful lot like one of her new co-workers. The man also happened to be named Bob, although he did have a different last name. When the woman went to question him about it, Bob panicked and ran from the hotel. The police were immediately alerted, but Bob Irwin once again avoided arrest. In the end, Bob Irwin would turn himself in. He called up the Chicago Examiner one day and said he would give them his confession. All that he asked for in return was $5,000, a white linen suit and a Panama hat. The Chicago Examiner agreed. They met with Bob at a hotel, and over a fine meal he gave his full confession. He admitted to taking Veronica's alarm clock, claiming that the green glowing hands reminded him of eyes and it upset him. He also apologized for murdering 3 people. He only meant to kill 1. After the confession was published, he surrendered to Chicago police and was arrested for the triple murders. He was examined by a lunacy commission, who judged him sane and fit for trial. This prompted Sam Lebowitz, the famed attorney who was defending Irwin, to suggest that the lunacy commissioners should have their own heads examined. A murder trial began, but after 7 days, Bob Irwin himself halted the proceedings by pleading guilty. He was sentenced to 139 years in Sing Sing prison. He made a bet with guards there that he would be a free man in 10 years. He was wrong. After just a few days at Sing Sing, Bob was examined again by a panel of prison psychiatrists. This time he was judged incurably insane. The mad sculptor spent his final 38 years locked away in institutions for the criminally insane at Dannemora and Matiowan. He died of cancer in 1975 at the age of 67 at the Matiowan State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Fishkill, New York, and was buried on the grounds. Questioned shortly after arrest, Bob was waxing philosophical about the prospect of being incarcerated.
I thought that after killing Veronica, then they would kill me in the chair. But I didn't care. Then I said to myself that after being in the nut house all of your life, you can't go to the chair. They'll put me in the nut house again, and then I'll be there all the rest of my life and catch up with myself in a spiritual way.
Well, my dear friends, I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Poor Ronnie. She must have thought what a stroke of luck to actually land such a job where she was making a good income. And, back in those days, it wouldn't have been so easy coming from an immigrant family without any education to make the big bucks that she was making. So hats off to her, really. But she really did well, and she wasn't throwing her money away. She'd obviously invested wisely in a house large enough to take in boarders, so she was setting herself up for the future, when her looks would no longer get her the modelling contracts. This snippet here I wanted to draw your attention to. I wonder whether Bob had some sort of sexual inadequacy. I'm just sort of wondering, after reading this article here, and unfortunately I don't have the whole article. I snipped it out of an online newspaper. I hadn't read it fully at the time, and I'm not going to go trawl through and find the thing again after so many articles, but it sort of indicates to me that he was very sexually frustrated. I wonder if he had some problem in that department. The fact that he took her clothes off, or the night attire that she had on, but didn't sexually attack her or the mother, and he even admitted being distracted by women and trying to castrate himself. That sort of, for me, indicates that he had some problems in that department, which caused him to have a rage about women. Yeah, and in this article here, he said that right at the end there, Ronnie asked me to sleep with her in July. He goes, I never touched her any time. I gave her a bath once. I mean, I find that hard to believe that he gave her a bath. What woman is going to ask a bloke that she's not intimately involved with to give her a bath? And didn't lucky Mary have an escape, that she was away that weekend? Wow, she definitely would have been victim too. My goodness. And the poor old Franklin Burns. Oh no, that if he had only woken up and not been deaf in that ear, he might have been able to stop what was happening, or at least get himself to safety. Very tragic. And the way the police treated the father, I mean, they definitely believed it was him, and in those days they get a confession hook or crook. They just beat the crap out of them. I wonder how many innocent people were hanged or went to the electric chair or spent their life in prison who were totally innocent of crimes just because the police wanted to wrap the case up. Lucky he was a really stoic bloke. He was not going to confess, doesn't matter how much they beat him up. His behaviour was a bit strange. Maybe that was his macho persona. Perhaps he was actually hurting inside but wasn't going to show the press or the police that. I don't know whether you got that in the story. Perhaps some of you might have missed it. Bob, the mad sculptor, actually made a death mask of Veronica directly after the murder. The police, when they were gathering evidence from the apartment, found a towel covered in plaster, and some expert had said that it is most probable that the murderer made a death mask. I don't know whether they found that death mask afterwards, whether it was in Bob's possession, I don't know, but very strange behaviour indeed. Yeah. I couldn't find any reports of how Bob behaved during his incarceration, but he was obviously off the planet, judging by his final statements to the press or to the court. Yeah, pretty weird. I hope he made use of his time locked away there in solitary confinement. That's what I read in one of the reports. Was he allowed to have any art utensils? Was he allowed to sculpt? I wonder where his sculptures are today. There must be a few knocking round. One thing I did find interesting was how Inside Detective actually got the exposure to have him captured. Even nowadays, you find with the internet, with people reporting these crimes on podcasts or on different social media sites, sometimes the cases get solved because of the amount of exposure that the police can't really get out there. It's definitely a positive thing. I think that's rather wonderful, of course, that we can get that exposure out there and solve some of these cases. And now also with a lot of cold cases being solved with the DNA technology, I think that's fantastic. I really do. I'm always happy when I see a murderer brought to justice. Anyway, my dear friends, I think we've just about wrapped that case up, and so on to the next case, and I'll see you when we get there. Okay, my dear friends, take care, God bless, and bye-bye.